Welcome to June's 27th following Father's Day sermon about the roles of husbands and wives. This is our Q&A. My name's Daryl. I'm our minister of online ministries. I can't even get straight. Director of online ministries. This is our pastor, Chance. We're doing just a question Q&A. I've got a few down here. And then, of course, if anybody in the audience wants to have or has a question, just butt in and let us hear it, because we get carried away sometimes. But so we discussed the role of submitting to one and another today. So the wife submitting to their husbands, the father submitting to their husbands, submitting to our wives. What does submitting look like? What does it look like to submit? Like, in today's world, we think a lot of, bringing ourselves beneath somebody. But, in that same sense, I'm not 100% sure that's exactly the role that we're talking about here.
Yeah, that's a good question. So it is certainly not beneath, because we're all created equal in God's image, right? So your wife and you were created in the same image of God. I think the mentality, though, does need to be that. Like, if I'm in submission to you, I'm willing to be beneath you. I'm willing for you to go first, for you to go ahead of me. The better way to think of it, though, is alongside. I'm not ahead and you're behind. You're not ahead and I'm behind. We're alongside. In the New Testament, in the Gospels, it's illustrated like a yoke of oxen. We don't get that anymore because we plow with tractors. But if we had two ox up here and they were going to yoke them together, they come alongside. If one is going a little faster or a little slower, if one's working less or working too hard than the other, there's always going to be strife. It's going to blister the neck. So we don't want to do anything that would be blistering the neck of our spouse. So we submit to one another in love.
Some examples I was told growing up as a child. I had a mechanic friend of mine who was really into Scripture, and he said that, a marriage between a man and a woman is the same as a marriage between a transmission and an engine. If your engine is pulling the transmission, and slipping the transmission and straining the gears in the transmission, your transmission's gonna burn up. If your transmission's geared too low for your engine, then your engine's gonna burn up. And I've always loved that. And another example I was told as a child was, your hand submits itself to your mouth to feed you, but the hand needs the mouth to be fed so the hand can do what it needs to do. Those are some of the examples I remember off the top of my head. Another question that I wrote down was, how do we identify the faults in ourselves when submitting to our spouses? In other words, how do we identify if we are the burden to our spouse?
Yeah. This is the hardest part of that relation. You have to be willing to take that constructive criticism from your spouse. That's what submission looks like. And that's hard, especially for the men, for your wife to have to say to you, you do this and it hurts, and I wish you wouldn't do that. And so we have to take that, and then we have to adjust to that. And we have to be able to take that in a way that wouldn't cause our wife to not want to give it to us again in the future. So it's a hard thing. I know as a man, I don't know what that looks like for a lady, but it has to be that two-way street. There has to be those open lines of communication so that we can critique one another and talk to each other about, this is what you're doing well, this is what you're doing poorly, this is what we have to work on together.
When I and my wife did marriage counseling, we actually got counseling from a family psychiatrist, and one of the things he said is the most crucial thing with our relationship with one another is to know when one of us says, when you do this, it makes me feel this, X, that comes from no malicious intent. So it takes two parts of the party. If I go to my wife and say, when you do this, it makes me feel this way, my wife also has to be able to receive that and say, and to herself, that this is not him trying to make me feel bad.
And a good response in that exercise is, you can only respond okay. So let's pretend we're married, Daryl.
Well, only biblical, right?
So Daryl says to me, when you do this, it makes me feel this. When my wife and I have that discussion, I want to justify, I want to defend, I want to correct right there on the spot. That's not why she's telling me. What I actually need to do there is just say, okay. And even if I have a justification or a defense, you can't give it till tomorrow. You have to let that thing simmer for at least 24 hours, because if you don't, you're going to fight more than share critiques.
And if the tensions aren't high, what the psychiatrist recommended for us was to ask, the response is supposed to be, can you help give me some ideas of how I can fix the problem? Example was, recently my wife, I work a lot in the summer. I'm an air conditioning guy. My wife tells me that when I work as long as I do, it makes her feel undesirable, like that she's not on my radar. And so my solution, I don't have a solution. So like that makes me feel bad. But my response is, what is some solutions that we can fix this problem? Maybe I need to start turning down some work. Do we really need all this extra work, all this extra money? How can we rectify the problem? We'll turn to the audience, I guess, the auditorium. Do we have any questions tonight? It feels really awkward talking about roles of wives when our wives are actually in the audience. Nobody. Okay, well, I just wrote down a few tidbits of thought more than I wrote down any questions. We need to separate from our fathers and mothers so we can become our own fathers and our own mothers. We take on so much pride building our own physical life, cutting our grass, building our lawns, buying nice cars, fixing our roofs, repairing our air conditioning, but we rarely take any pride into our metaphysical selves and relationships.
I'm convinced one of the idols that we cling to in at least the Baptist church in the South is the idol of blood kin relationships. We put that above everything else. We always say blood's thicker than water, and that's not the way it's intended to be. Jesus said, if you're going to follow me, you got to hate your mother, your father, your sister, your brother. That doesn't mean you've actually got to hate their guts and never speak to them again. But the mentality has to be, now Jesus is your brother, your father, your sister, your mother. And then when we get married, it falls into that same thing. Like you said, we're recreating what's been modeled for us. So we have to leave mother and father. And I would just admonish us all here in this regard. That doesn't mean you don't listen to them and take their wisdom because they're full of good wisdom. It just means you don't lean on them more than your spouse. They're a secondary opinion, the same as your pastor would be or a friend at work would be in that regard, which is hard because we love our parents so much. The other admonition would be, don't let blood kin be an idol.
It is scary, too. I mean, as a 20-something-year-old getting married to another 20-something, they don't know much more than you know. And it's the way you feel, at least. And so you want your default is to go to who's always consistently giving you, hopefully, good advice on life.
And when you're looking for a spouse, you want to marry someone who you trust their parents like you trust your parents. So that when her parents are offering advice to you, you can receive it the same as if your parents were, and vice versa.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us for this Q&A. My name is Daryl. I'm the Director of Online Ministries, and this is our pastor, Chance Strickland. I hope you guys have a wonderful and blessed day. Thank you.